I am excited to be here, and I don't know that there could be a better topic than imagination to talk about, because imagination is at the very foundation of unity. And, you know, we call ourselves Unity, and I love it, but we're under a larger umbrella of the movement of New Thought, which is also called religious science. And one of my favorite things are the paradoxes that happen when you really engage with the human experience. And imagination is one of the most interesting paradoxes there is. Because when you hear imagination, like, what is the normal, common definition of imagination? If I say I have an imaginary friend, or I'm thinking of something imaginary, what is someone going to say? It's not real. But we in Unity know that there is nothing more real than imagination. What makes us divine as human beings is not real. Like, let me unpack that. I love understanding human nature, lifting the hood on human nature. It makes me super nerdy and interesting. And one of the wildest things about humanity and consciousness is that, as best as we can tell, we are the only creatures that can imagine what isn't yet real. Now, certain animals can imagine what isn't, that they can't see. So a dog or a cat who's hunting something, like the cat will sit at the hole in the wall, right? And it will imagine the mouse that's there. It can't see the mouse, but it knows that it can hear it. But we as human beings are the only creatures that can imagine stories. So if I said a sentence that has never been said in the history of humanity, something like, imagine in a moment, someone is going to walk in the back door and turn into a rainbow-colored sperm whale with wings, filling the entire room and crushing us to the edges of the room. You just imagined it. Crazy! Can't happen. Never. That sentence has never been said before, I assure you. And yet, instantly, we can imagine it. Imagination is the foundation of unity. Imagination is the foundation of religious science. Because one of the great secrets and paradoxes of our brains, these amazing, miraculous, divine brains, is that our brains cannot tell the difference between reality and imagination. And this is why all words are spells. And this is why we need to be very mindful and we need to be very careful about what we imagine. Because what we imagination becomes real. And this is what we mean in Unity when we say we are creating our reality. Now, one of the most interesting things as I was studying Unity, going through all of my classes, is affirmative prayer. And an affirmative prayer, can anyone tell me like what the logic underneath affirmative prayer is? So when I say like, please give me health, God, give me health, why don't we say that in Unity? We see it as we already is. So when I say, God, please give me health, what are we assuming? What's underneath give me health? If I'm saying, please give me health that I don't have, we are saying, I don't have health. And this is one of the deep problems of the world in which we live. I love being a chaplain. I've worked in hospice for 5 years, prison for 4 years, and the hospital for 6 months. And our entire health, right? Like, I mean, our health system is not a health system. We need to pathologize. We are addicted to sickness. We are paid for sickness. Our entire system is based on being sick and broken. So when you go to the hospital, when you go to therapy, when you go, it is a lack-based, sickness-based world. And when I was doing my ordination packet, one of the questions is define unity as succinctly as possible. And I love succinct. Succinctness is one of my favorite things. A friend told me that I communicate in memes, and it's true. And so my definition of unity is a thoroughgoing commitment to life and love. And we talk a lot about positivity and positive thinking, but unity goes deeper than that. And what is toxic positivity? A lot of you have probably heard that term. So toxic positivity is when we want to jump the steps. You know, we want to talk positive, look positive. I mean, just scroll through Instagram, and people are looking so positive, and it's literally killing people. Because we aren't able to affirm our reality, our whole reality. And again, for that takes imagination. Now, yet another paradox is that it also requires imagination to understand what's real. And I'll explain that. Because we live in a world of wishful thinking. And we need to understand how our brains work so that we can engage in a healthier way. Because as human beings, we are very fear-based, right? That's why it takes effort, it takes time, it takes training. Unity is a soul training. And I went from academia to ministry. And academia is about knowing things in our minds, which is not terribly useful. Because when we know things in our minds, ironically, it often helps us avoid things in reality. So we need to know things in our body. We need to know things all the way down. We need to act on things in our body long enough that they become real. And that's what integrity is. Integrity is when our values and our thoughts and our words and our actions and our behavior and our patterns all line up. And this is why our actions are what we should take the most seriously. So our actions communicate what is real, and our words, what we communicate what we want to be real. Now, why does it take imagination to understand what's really real? Is because the way that we usually work is we are in denial, especially men, because they're allowed to get away with it. And it is very, very difficult to confront the reality of what we are. And so first, it requires imagination to say, what if my spouse is right? You know, what if my coworker is right? What if this feedback that I'm getting is actually accurate? What if I'm not as, if I don't have as much character quite yet as I want? What if I am what if I have blind spots? Because another paradox, and I call this exceptional blind spot, is that we are as good as we are incentivized and empowered to be. But the crazy thing is that we are so contextually sensitive. So let's think about employment is one of our main incentives, right? We're currently in a consumerist death cult. More on that later. But if it's our job, usually we get good at it. And the amazing thing about ministry, I have the luxury of doing this full time. You have to be an electrician. But the luxury of being a minister, being a chaplain, is I am a professional good person. And I call myself an asshole for goodness because So my true character is I see everything as a puzzle. I love being in my brain. I love solving things. And it turns out people don't exactly like being solved. They prefer more to be loved. And so I have been able to use my strengths to come around to goodness. And I'm being a bit playful, like I'm generally a good person. But we have to be very, very honest about what's real. So let's take a couple jobs. Like if you're a lawyer or if you are a doctor, your job depends on you knowing when you're wrong. So a lawyer has to anticipate the opposing arguments, right? And a doctor has to anticipate what they're not thinking about. Now, and that is why lawyers and doctors, when they get home, totally listen to their spouses, right? And totally acknowledge when they're wrong. Not so much. Because the crazy thing is that they use these very powerful mental processes to get out of accountability. And so the things that they are exceptional at work become their greatest weaknesses at home. And so this is why we need to use imagination to get at a better understanding of reality. We need imagination to access actual reality. And this is what unity is about. Unity is about training our imagination into our bodies so that we make it real. Now, there are three main kinds of reality. I don't have much tolerance for people who think themselves too smart. A lot of times when people leave religion, they fall in love with what they think is science, right? And the irony is they have an emotional relationship to the idea of science. And so they know what's real, they know what's not real. And so they say, okay, like science is real and religion is not real and art is not real and imagination is not real. But again, this is what's in their heads. So objective truth is real independent of what we think. So you don't need to study biochemistry to get nutrition from food. Like your body just metabolizes the healthy food and you get healthy. You don't need to understand epidemiology to get sick, as we know. Now, our minds do impact our health to a tremendous amount that we'll talk about in just a moment. But objective truth is real, independent of what we believe. Now, subjective truth is real because of what we believe. And this is where unity, religious science, divine mind, imagination really has power. I can't remember the researcher on stress. I'll need to find her name, but this was crazy. The stress researcher revolutionized the field because she said stress is more dangerous than pretty much anything else. You know, like if you are stressed, you very well, like heart disease is one of the top, like as we've seen, you know, affirming health and wholeness for Troy. Heart disease is one of the leading causes of death, and stress is one of the leading causes of heart disease. And so this stress researcher had the very important insight, you have to manage your stress or it's a matter of life and death. And then she realized that she was increasing stress with her insight about stress. Because when people feel stressed, they're like, I'm going to get a heart attack, I'm going to die. And the body says, okay. And this is why affirmative thinking and affirmative prayer is so, so important. And this is the brilliance of unity. I taught world religion for years. And I can still say, as a professional and professor of world religions, unity is the most beautiful religious tradition I have ever come across. And one irony in my own life, and this is an important thing about imagination, is we can only imagine what we can imagine, right? And this is why imagination needs to be a conversation. This is why we need to have inspired imagination. This is why we need to be open to things that we cannot yet imagine. David Whyte is one of my favorite poets, my favorite thinkers. And he has this essay on ambition. And he says, the strength of ambition is that it is so easily put into words and described to others. The very weakness of ambition, the disease of ambition, is that it can so easily be put into words and described to others. And then he has this amazing line, we are all compost for worlds we cannot yet imagine. We are all compost for worlds we cannot yet imagine. And Jared Anderson, as a Unity minister, is my world that I could not imagine. When I first became a chaplain, I was endorsed by the Humanist Society. And I was really gung-ho about humanism. I was really excited about humanism. And I'm still excited about humanism, because humanism is a human-centered approach to life. And then I got ordained as a Buddhist. And then I found Unity, or I was led to Unity on my 42nd birthday, which fans of Douglas Adams will find poetic. So I was at the hospital this week dealing with a very complicated situation, and a family member of a patient said, so what is your religious background? And it felt so good to say Unity. Now, when I had to say humanism, there was a whole footnoted explanation to it because it's so easily misunderstood. And Unity requires a conversation and explanation, but it is so powerful. One of the fundamental questions that we can't answer that pertains very much to imagination and very much to Unity is, are we as human beings aligning ourselves with a greater reality, or are we creating a greater reality? Guess what? It doesn't matter. Because we know that we can and do create a greater reality. So, again, we need to be aware of the fact that we require imagination because that is how our brains work. I playfully and seriously call myself a devout agnostic, certain theist, because we need to take seriously the fact that perception is hallucination and memory is fiction. And this is the power of imagination, is that what we affirm and affirm and affirm and affirm is real, becomes real. And here is the great secret. The great secret is that what we hold in mind over time becomes real in our bodies, in our communities, in our relationships, and in the world. A couple quick quotes. Charles Fillmore said, when the faculties of mind are understood in their threefold relations, spirit, soul, body, it will be found that every form and shape originated in the imagination. It is through the imagination that the formless takes form. Humankind and the universe are a series of pictures in the mind of being. God made people in their image and likeness. People in their turn are continually making and sending forth into their minds, their bodies, and the world about them, living thought forms embodied and imbued with their whole character. And then I just finished a book, Into the Magic Shop. I highly recommend it. And James Doty went from a poor boy in Texas to one of the top neurosurgeons in the world. And he, as a neurosurgeon, affirms the reality, again, that the mind cannot distinguish, cannot differentiate what we are perceiving and what we are imagining. Because again, the crazy secret is we're not really seeing things. It turns out our eyes are designed kind of crazy. Squids have much better vision. And let's not even talk about mantis shrimps or butterflies. I mean, they can see so much better. In fact, we have a bunch of nerves like right in front of our eyes, so our brains literally need to just fill in the gaps. I had eye surgery in December, and so I have 20/15 vision, which feels like a miracle. I went from like a -12 correction. I'm in my last stages getting into the military, and my eyes were the only things that we were waiting for. And the Bible uses the term the eye of faith, and our imagination is actually the very most powerful vision that we can have. So I want to close with an invitation to imagine our divine self, imagine our divine relationship, imagine our future, and imagine a better world. One thing that is difficult that I've had to learn is reality is kind of a foreign language for me. I have an idealism-based naivete where I'm like, whoa, what? The world's not perfect yet? Oh, man. And I call myself a recovering idealist. And Buddhism was really, really good for me because Buddhism has this radical acceptance, this radical engagement with reality. Buddhism says, love what is, and I said, no, I don't want it, because I want to live in the world of imagination. And there are multiple versions of imagination. Again, we probably won't talk much about Mormonism, which I call the universe in the fishbowl, which is a very interesting imagined world, which is very, very powerful. Buddhism takes one extreme, and Buddhism says there is no self, there is no reality, it's all an illusion. But the beautiful thing about Buddhism is Buddhism breaks our minds and our perceptions and our illusions to say, there is reality, there is self. But that reality in yourself, again, is beyond anything you can imagine. So our imagination needs to become this constant conversation, this constant updating. Buddhism says not self, because there is no self in particular, and your self, your divine self, is again greater than what you can imagine. I've mentioned this before in an earlier lesson, but at one of my lowest points after my second divorce that I did not want to happen and I made happen because I know it had to happen, I was wondering, this is like the beginning of Unity for me, years before I came across Unity. I was like, where is my Savior? Because I didn't believe in one anymore. And I felt inspired. And the answer was, you are. Now, this is before I understood Christ consciousness. This is before I understood divine mind. But in this beginning, so what I did is I tapped into what I called 45. I'll be 44 next month, which is my 45-year-old self, which at that time was 6 years in the future. And I asked my 45-year-old self, it was his eyes I noticed first. So much compassion and groundedness, more compassion and groundedness than I ever could imagine. And I said, how did you get over my ex-wife? And he laughed at me. And I said, oh, you didn't. And I said, but it doesn't matter, does it? And he's like, of course not. And this was the limits of my imagination, getting right at the edge of what I could imagine, because grief, which I've now become an expert on as a chaplain, we don't get over grief. We grow so big and so deep and so alive that we can hold it in a new way. Metabolize is my favorite word around grief, because when people ask me how I can handle what I do as a chaplain, I say I design my day-to-day, minute-by-minute process in such a rigorous way that I can handle whatever comes in the moment. And so, did I get over my divorce? Not exactly. Does my divorce bother me? Not really. Is my divorce the very foundation of the best things in my life in a way that I could not have fathomed? Absolutely. And again, that is the power of imagination. And so it is. Oh, and I lapped 45 at 43 about. I looked into the mirror and I was like, oh, good to see you. Ahead of schedule. Again, because I couldn't have imagined how much I would grow. And it's the same thing, and this is what unity teaches, is that we hold in our bodies, we affirm and affirm and affirm that divine self, that better self. We hold our relationships as they could be, as they really are, and we hold that better world that I like believing in, that I keep needing to remind myself is not quite here yet. And so I've said before, my favorite description of Jesus' ministry is he lived as if the kingdom had already come. And this is what unity is. This is what this group is we are living the kingdom into the existence where it already exists. And so it is, and so we make it with every thought and every action. Amen.